Star Wars Young Jedi Knights Return to Ord Mantell, Chapter 14. As Millennium Falcon took off with a roar, Zeke heard the villagers crowded in the back of the Falcon moan with fear. His attention, though, was focused on the sparks and flashes of light that signified lightsabers the young Jedi Knights fought down below. Zeke, get that into the gun well and start blasting those creatures, Han Solo shouted. I hope your laser cannons are fully charged, Zeke said. Climbing down to the gunwale, he dropped into the Falcon, strapped in, and powered up the Falcon's weaponry. Han Solo lowered to the ground, swooping back towards the ramshackle village. The reptilian predators prowled around, moving with the speed of hunger, cunning and evident in their intelligent yellow eyes. There are so many of them, Zeke muttered. Seeing the sinuous shapes dart forward like purplish-blue shadows, one of the creatures grabbed a young man and swallowed him in a single gulp before Zeke could aim the laser cannons. He wondered if the victim would be one of the brash young men who tried to act so brave when the Nars were first coming. Zeke targeted and fired, blowing the reptilian creature into sizzling bits. He rotated the gun well again, seeking another target. It was difficult to zero in on the dark, shadowy monsters and didn't dare risk hitting one of the people. Below, an Nar advanced along the pale wall of a building. One villager tried to take shelter around the corner of the doorway. The Nar approached, sniffling, its claws extended. Zeke targeted and fired. The frightened villager scrambled to one side as the smoking body of the enormous reptile slunk in the ground in front of him, its fanged mouth wide open. A shot now fired from the other gunwale, striking one of the Serenians in its lower leg. The moment it collapsed, honking and howling in pain, the other Nars fell upon the wounded companion. I hope you don't mind, Zeke, Anakin said through the comm system. I have a bit of targeting training myself, but the twins get to practice more often. The Nars continued to sweep forward. Two new ones seemed to appear for every one Zeke blasted. Han Solo circled around and came back for another run, his concerned voice over the comm system. What's she doing? Jane is leading them toward the minefield, Anakin's voice replied. Zeke looked down and saw the glow of the lightsaber blades the young Jedi Knights had turned and headed into the remaining villagers into the barren fields are full of burrowing detonators. He thought of Jaina down there fighting against monsters and running even more dangerous territory. His heart sank, but he gritted teeth and grabbed the firing controls. He couldn't pull off a spectacular if he couldn't pull off a spectacular rescue, at least to do his part to keep her safe, or as safe as he could under the circumstances. Jaina planted her feet firmly on the rough ground and held her lightsaber high. A slavering Nar in front of her did not seem to be at all intimidated by her violet Jedi blade. The reptilian creature gave a high-pitched bellow and then reached forward with claws, snapping its powerful jaws that looked strong enough to rip a repulsor pod from a starship engine. Jaina swung forward and down with her crackling lightsaber, cleaving the monster from its shoulder down to the center of its rib cage. The creature thrashed and fell down as smoking blood burbled from its dying heart. Anja continued to let loud whoops and shouts of challenge. She ran faster than the Nars, darting from one to another, wounding them with her lightsaber and diving out of the way as their claws slashed at her. She let the carnivores do the rest of the work for her. She needed only to wound a beast when the other Nars would tear it to pieces for the meat. Anja's hair flew like in the wind, barely held in place by the leather bands. Sweat dripped down her temples and onto her flushed face. But she was so full of adrenaline, she seemed incapable of slowing down. Lobaka let out a wild rookie roar as he and Jason motioned the other villagers to follow them into the treacherous cropland. The villagers picked up their farming implements and ran. Panicked, some of them dashed right past the young Jedi. "Wait! We'll find a safe pass for you!" Jason yelled. But one of the middle-aged women, clutching a satchel of valuables over her shoulder, tore ahead in blind terror. She fled the Nars. No, wait! She ran through the uncleared cropland. Jason felt an intuitive stab and chill at the back of his neck, a premonition before she stepped down on one of the hidden burrowing detonators. The explosion ripped through the night with a flash of brilliance and a boom of echoing thunder. The woman fell instantly, but the monsters charged toward the fields, and Jason could not take a moment to determine whether or not she had survived. The villagers screamed in despair, caught between their fear of the minefield ahead and the roaring, rampaging predators behind. Lowy roared something at Jason about the forest and gestured to the ground. EMTD quickly translated. Master Lobaka suggests that by using our Jedi senses, you could perhaps determine the locations of the burn detonators and thus avoid them. This would give them the best chance of survival. Jason realized that his Wookiee friend was right. If he could calm himself enough to use the Force, he might be able to map out a safe path that the villagers could follow, a path the Nars would not understand. And I do suggest you be careful, the little droid added. I have no desire to become a useless lump of floating metal with no one to translate for. As his eyes adjusted to darkness lit only by the green glow of his lightsaber and EMTD's optical sensors, Jason trotted ahead as fast as he dared, keeping his eyes to the ground. Stretching out his free-handed form, he sensed ripples in the dirt, tiny echoes of movement. Then he spotted a slight trembling where mechanical explosives had tunneled beneath the surface. Across the fields, he could see a checkered pattern of places to avoid and places he was safe to walk. "Follow us," he shouted, holding his emerald lightsaber like a beacon overhead. "We can see a path." The ginger-feared Wookiee bellowed a confirmation, blazing his own molten bronze blade, and sprinted ahead on his long legs. A magenta glow from Tenel Ka's rancor-toothed lightsaber indicated another safe path. Jaina and Anja remained behind to guard the group's retreat and slow down the charging beasts. Overhead, the Millennium Falcon engines rumbled in the air. Laser beams laced out from both gun turrets, striking Nars. Still more of the migratory pack surged like a carnivorous flood out of the rocky hills. Villagers ran onward, grasping at any shred of hope as they followed Jason Lowy through the minefield. Fortunately, the Nars did not understand the explosives. They surged forward on their scaly, muscular legs, ready to snatch anyone who fell behind. Two of the largest Nars, their silvery razor frills raised and yellow eyes glowing like lamps in the darkness, circled around to the left to charge ahead of the fleeing group and cut off their retreat. Tenel Ka turned to face them, glaring with her granite gray eyes as if daring them to approach. The two reptiles kept moving, staying close together. When the larger Nar stomped on one of the barrowing detonators, the explosion knocked both creatures aside, tearing open their rib cages. They lay wounded on the ground, honking and roaring in pain. Tenel Ka would have dispatched them herself, but the noises only served to attract other hungry Nars. Before long, under the double moonlight of Anubis, the two predators fell silent as their roars were replaced by the wet sounds of roaring meat and gnashing fangs. The Falcon soared above the Nars, blasting more of the creatures. One of the villagers tripped. Before he could scramble to his feet again, two monsters fell upon him. When another young man turned back with a shout and tried to defend his friend, the Nars attacked him as well. In the last instant, it seemed the young man was surely doomed. Anja appeared beside him. Her lightsaber swept out of the blazing path of the acrid yellow to sloop off the forearms of the predator. The sizzling stumps of its clawed hands fell about the ground, and the monster roared, flailing about, unable to grasp anything. In a blind rage, it chomped at the nearest creature, another Nar. The two reptiles tore each other, wrestling one another to the ground. In moments, other predators came to finish off both of them. The cropland stretched ahead, seemingly forever. Jason continued run, finding it easier to pick his way around the burrowing detonators now. He saw some active ones shifting their positions underneath the soil. Beyond, the thick forest looked like a good goal line. If only they could get to the shelter of the trees. Perhaps they could fight better than in the open. But Jason couldn't be sure. For now, they would just running. He couldn't imagine how the group could possibly turn aside all the Nars, even with 5 active lightsaber blades and assistance from the Millennium Falcon. 2 more explosions ripped the night, and Jason was relieved to see that only more reptilian predators stumbling upon the explosives. He looked to one side and saw in a bobbing metallic sphere. EMTD had detached himself from Lowy's belt and drifted ahead on his remote micro-repulsor jets, flitting from side to side in front of the beast like a remote practice drone. One of the largest Nars lumbered forward, attracted by Lowy's molten bronze lightsaber blade. The Wookiee stopped its headlong run and whirled to face the monster. The Nar charged forward, exposing its razor teeth. EMTD flitted in front of the monster's jaws, distracting the creature so it snapped at the silvery sphere and diverted its fiery graze from Lobaka. Lowy used the moment of distraction to strike sideways, severing the Nar's body at the waist. Its head still twisted and snapped, even though it had no body to move. The surviving villagers kept running. Ahead of them, forest loomed taller. Dozens and dozens of Saronitan giants had been killed, but the pack seemed to be thinning a bit. Jason did not feel at all relieved. The Falcon circled by again, blasting away. More of the monsters died. The people continued to stumble along the haphazard path the young Jedi Knights picked for them through the booby-trapped field. Many villagers were in shock, just following, placing one foot in front of another, unable to fully face their peril. Jason sensed their fear and could only hope the situation would change once they reached the thick trees. "Hurry up! Get into the forest!" he shouted. With despairing sighs, the people nearest him tried to increase their pace, but they were too exhausted. Daddy. Weak from malnutrition and years of living in fear for their lives, several of them stumbled and fell, only to be helped by their feet by their equally exhausted companions. Jason could tell that everyone's energy reserves were running out. If they had to continue this battle, they would not make it much farther.